Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Expert Voices series. Today's conversation is our third and final event in a three-part series examining the legal profession's response to the call for racial justice. I know that we have some folks who have joined us before, but for those of us who haven't, I'll introduce myself and some of our participants now. Our Expert Voices series, it's a series of virtual conversations that we are thrilled that will continue well into 2021 and possibly even beyond that, when we can meet again in person. And they're allowing us to bring different topics of interest to our alumni, wherever you may all be located. For those of you who we have not yet had the chance to meet in person or virtually, I'm Meredith Robinson. I'm your Senior Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement. And I'd like to also introduce Allison James, who is our Associate Director of Constituent Relations, and we are your alumni office. Before I introduce our guests, I just have two housekeeping items. We will be recording the event today, and it will be posted under all of our past events and recordings on the alumni website page. And then also just continue to please mute yourself for these conversations. And after Lauren and Brenna finish their conversation, we will open it up to Q&A. Feel free we can have a nice conversation. Feel free to ask questions or put those in the chat for us. And now on to our event. So first we have Lauren Mizzell. She's from the class of 2011. Lauren is our East Coast Diversity Coordinator for Sidley Austin LLP. Lauren has worked at Sidley for 4 years and began her career working jointly in the legal recruiting department, as well as human resources, managing attorneys' practice and career development. In Lauren's current role, she is responsible for the recruitment, retention, and promotion of all lawyers, but most specifically women and diverse lawyers in the firm. She works closely with the D&I team, management, partner, and associate committees to address challenges and issues pertaining to work allocation hours, business and career development, equity, and inclusion. She also works very closely with and supports law school affinity groups and diverse law students throughout the academic school year. In the summer months, Lauren runs and helps support the various summer programs as well. Prior to joining Sidley, Lauren was an event trainee for the BMW Drive for Team USA team. She spent the following months after graduation traveling with the US Olympians for BMW in preparation for the Olympic Games in Rio. Lauren graduated from Loyola University, Maryland in 2015, and she currently resides in Alexandria as well. And then we have Brenna DeVaney joining us. Brenna directs Skadden's global pro bono practice and is responsible for the firm's relationship with legal services, organizations, and nonprofits. Her own practice focuses on representing low-income individuals, including women in family law matters who have been the victims of domestic violence. Brenna also is involved with the Skadden Honors Program in Legal Studies at the City College of New York, which is part of the firm's effort to increase diversity in law schools and the legal profession. Additionally, she regularly consults with corporate legal departments on their efforts to develop in-house pro bono programs. Brenna serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Michigan Law School and Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. She is a frequent lecturer and presenter at both national and international convenings focused on access to justice. Prior to her role as the firm's first pro bono associate, Brenna was a member of the Government Enforcement and White Collar Crime Group, where she represented individual and corporate clients in federal and state criminal and regulatory matters and conducted internal corporate investigations. And now I will let Lauren and Brenna take it away.
Thank you so much, Meredith, and thank you to everyone who was able to join today. I'm very excited for this discussion. And I just want to get everything kind of kicked off by just giving a little bit of background into what it is that I do and specialize, and it'll kind of tie in nicely into the questions that I have for Brenna. Just looking at this as a full picture, historically, big law has struggled internally and externally with many equality issues, from the number of minority and LGBT associates and lawyers to the lack of female and diverse minority leaders at many of these major law firms. And a lot of these equality issues don't just start when, a lawyer is fresh out of law school and starting in their first years. a lot of these issues exist and they start within as early as like grade school. So systemically, there are a lot of key factors and resources that are missing that keep students from marginalized communities out of these industries. And when we think back to many of these systems that are in place and who built them and who they were built for, many of the times when we look to today, it wasn't for, you know, the diverse groups that we see today, and especially the legal industry. And so we start as early within recruiting diverse candidates and students as early as the elementary, middle, and high school years. And many of the students are coming from low income and marginalized groups who are interested in pursuing careers within higher professions, whether it be law or not. And so those issues continue to funnel when those students make it into college. And then when they make it into law school as well, there are many issues that diverse law students do face, including like segregation, elitism, classism. There's so many major contributing factors that make it very difficult for these diverse students to thrive. And then ultimately, once they come into the legal industry, they kind of have their guard up, especially when it comes to issues of race. And so with all of these things in mind, when the diverse lawyers tend to start, and this has been a lot of conversations that I do have with incoming lawyers, is the skepticism and the cynicism when it comes to firms making bold statements around fundamental change to its systems. And there's a lot of cynicism to firms making blanket statements around altering the systems or the behaviors in individual peoples. And so we're actually seeing this play out today, currently. Right now, as we're watching COVID decimate essentially the Black and Brown communities, and over the summer, the senseless murders of the Black men and women and Brown men and women right in front of our eyes. It was very in the forefront, and you couldn't really escape it. And so during this time, it feels like there is a special focus on it. And over the summer, on June 23rd, over 125 law firms actually joined a newly launched Law Firm Antiracism Alliance, which is actually led by the efforts of Skadden. And so the primary goal of the alliance is actually to address not only individual assaults on equality and social justice, but the structures that are in place that allow those inequalities to propagate. And so to assist with the goal, which is a very lofty goal, especially for law firms and where they've been in the past, legal service organizations and law firms are collaborating jointly to ensure that we're having the necessary tools and resources to succeed in these efforts. And so Brenna, my first question for you is, as a Skadden leader, as Skadden is a leader driving the Alliance in the initiative, how did we get here, and what influences do you see the Alliance having on big law in the legal industry altogether?
Thank you, Lauren. And I will answer your question, but given this is the first moment I've had to open my mouth, I'd like to just start with saying that anytime I have the privilege of having anyone listen to me for any amount of time, given how precious time is, I like to think about what's the most important thing I could say to the people who are listening to me. And I came up with 3 things for today. First is I always like to start with thanks. And so I want to thank you, Lauren, for helping me to be prepared to talk to your community, to Meredith for being so professional in putting this all together, and to Erin for even making the introduction and thinking I would be someone worth your time. And then finally to all of you who some of your faces I can see and some of them I can't, but it really is a privilege to have a few moments of your time because time is so precious. So that's the first thing I'd say. Second, as we continue this conversation for the next bit, I hope that all of you are interested in what we're saying about the Law Firm Antiracism Alliance, the legal profession, and pro bono in general. But I also hope that we also view this as really just an example of people who care about something putting their privilege to use. and that all of us have skills and some form of privilege that if we care about something, we can make a difference, in particular about racial justice work and race equity work, but whatever we care about. And then finally, and I hesitate to say this because giving parenting advice in a school setting is probably a dangerous thing to do, but I will say I'm sort of qualified in that I have 4 kids. And I will say that one of the most important things I think we can do if we care about racial justice and race equity or anything really is to start asking our kids what they care about. What are they worried about? What are they concerned about? And letting them know that from the very beginning, they are empowered to do something about those things that they care about. And that's a practice that I have with my own kids. I think I annoy them a lot of the time when I say we're going to create a community service opportunity for our neighborhood. But I hope that they will grow up into people who know if they care about something or are troubled by something, they can make change. And I hope that resonates with all of you. So Lauren, back to your question. How did we get here? So I've been having a lot of conversations about the Law Firm Antiracism Alliance since June, when we decided to embark on this endeavor. And I think that question of what are we doing now and why now is rightfully and justifiably loaded with why not before? Why didn't law firms, lawyers, people do something within the legal system to tackle systemic racism from the perspective of the private bar? And let me be very clear that there have been racial justice advocates in the legal services and public interest community forever. What we're talking about here is the private bar, law firms, for-profit legal institutions, in-house legal departments, and the like. So why didn't we do this before? And so I've been struggling with that question. And I have to be upfront and say I don't have a very good answer, because of course it would have been better if we did this before. Of course it would have. But that's not what happened. And I think what happened over the past 6 to 9 months is that we were in this perfect moment where people were, and I mean perfect not in a sunshine and unicorn sort of way, but perfect in terms of incubating this effort, that following the murder of George Floyd, but lawyers in particular for the purposes of this conversation, were activated in a different way. That they said, enough, I don't care where I work, I have to do something about this. And layered next to or on top of that is the fact that we're all, for the most part, sitting at home. And we're very uncomfortable and we're lonely and we have lots of time to think. And we're hoping to find ways to make the world a better place. And so out of that moment came this idea that across law firms and legal institutions, we might align in a different way to bring to bear the resources of the private bar to really add value to what legal services and public interest organizations have already been doing in a different way. I also want to make clear that law firms do a good job in terms of their pro bono programs historically, but most of that effort has been focused on the symptoms and manifestations of racism on individual people's lives. And we have less frequently or even rarely had the opportunity to take on systems or impact at a large scale. And so the Law Firm Antiracism Alliance is very intentionally focused on not redirecting legal energy from individual direct representation, but to doing something that's more and bigger and bolder around systems and impact. And so that's where we hope to add value by bringing the resources to the work that's already being done and that will be newly done. Did I answer the first question? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. And thank you also for that intro. And I mean, just when you're talking about like people being activated and hoping to make the world a better place, I think 9 times out of 10, like all of us are very optimistic and we're always hopeful. And especially I think during this time, a lot of people are kind of finding the things that they're passionate about and that they care about. And so it's just great that like you guys were able to create this alliance for like-minded people to, have an impact on society and this work. And that kind of leads me into my next question as to like, how do we keep this momentum going? Because once the vaccines start getting, start getting out there and we start kind of taking back, going back to a quote unquote normal life, how do we keep this, at the forefront of people's minds and just making sure that this isn't just a moment of time and then like 5 years from now we look back and we're just like, oh yeah, like that was a great initiative and nothing really came of it. Like, how do we prevent that from happening?
Yeah, Lauren, that is so important. And a mantra that we keep repeating to ourselves is this has to be a movement, not a moment. This has to be a movement, not a moment. And law firms have struggled with, chasing a shiny object, right? So if there's a hurricane, we go there. If there's an immigration crisis, we go there. And that's important that we respond to current events and what's happening. And in some instances, that's appropriate because we have shorter term crises. But for something like systemic racism, we can't expect to do something for 3 to 9 months and make change. And so we have been very clear in building this alliance that what we're talking about is a very intentionally focused effort that is 5 to 30 or 100 years. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We are asking people to sign on to dismantle something that is baked into the Constitution of this country and beyond. So we have to do that. So how do we do that? So people who organize pro bono programs are pretty good at thinking about how do we get volunteer workforces to continue doing something? Because even though I work at a firm and my colleagues work at firms, you work at a firm where people are paid to do legal work, doing pro bono work goes above and beyond that commitment for the most part. There are advantages and benefits, certainly, but it is people taking on something that they don't otherwise have to take on. So how do we do that at the individual level and at the institutional level, the law firm level? So what we've learned about building projects that succeed and are maintained is, I talk to my law students about 4 aspects of it. There's the need, the interest, the resources, and the infrastructure. And in this instance, there's also community. So if we look at it from that perspective, is there a need to dismantle systemic racism in the United States? Yes. I mean, if you want to argue with me about that offline, we can do that, but I'm not going to spend our time on that, right? Is there interest? Yes. There's always been interest, but there's heightened interest right now that we have to capture and carry along, right? So resources, that's an interesting thing to think about. And that's where the law firm Antiracism begins to enter the conversation. How do we build collaboration and organization around those resources so that what we can do is call up our legal services and public interest colleagues and say, we've got all this stuff to give you, all this person power, pro bono power, and beyond. What do you need us to do? And then the infrastructure is really where LFAA comes into play. So we are building a structure with leadership and technology and leadership power, not just from law firms, but from general counsels of corporations to sustain that infrastructure. And then I think the unique piece here is the community. So if people feel like they are a part of something, they are more likely to continue doing something with that community. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I love about LFAA is that there are usual players in the pro bono space. There's law firms like yours, Lauren, and like mine, and we often create projects together. What's really exciting, one of the things that's really exciting about LFAA is that we have now 286 law firms, and they're not just the usual players. Our smallest law firm has 2 people, and our largest law firm has 10,000 people, lawyers. So, I mean, that's well beyond what we've ever done before. And we have representation in every state in the United States, which gives us lawyers on the ground in every place we might want to be, and beyond to places like Austria, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and South Africa, where I'm not sure exactly how we'll use that energy or that lawyer power, but there are certainly lessons to learn from some of those places about racism and reconciliation and treatment of indigenous populations. So that's what we're trying to do to sustain the momentum.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. Like turning it from, this local initiative into a global initiative. And, there are different, systems and racism that exist in these other countries too, that they also have to address. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch it grow to be that big. Because I think when you have more people signed up for something like that, it feels a little bit more like, okay, yeah, this is doable. Like, we can do this. Whereas if you have like one or two, like, the passion's still there, but it's a little bit harder to, get the outreach. So I absolutely love that. And you started to dive into, the next question just around the resources that all of these other organizations are able to provide to the legal services and public agencies, and seeing all of this work be done and already having the background and seeing how lawyer participation in pro bono programs already is. And at least at Sidley, I'm not sure how it is at Skadden, but a lot of 9 times out of 10, a lot of the diverse lawyers are the ones taking on pro bono projects generally. You also have, the straight white males taking on pro bono also, like, it's a collective effort, but when you look at it in totality, it's more diverse associates taking on the pro bono work that really matters to them. And so have you seen a shift in lawyer participation since the launch of the Alliance, and just since, everything that's happened from over the summer? And how are you and your team working to ensure that you and your colleagues are representing and supporting the most vulnerable communities out there?
There's a lot in that question, right? There's who's doing the pro bono work, how do we get them activated, and how do we represent the right people? I think right, pro bono at law firms and who does the pro bono work is really complicated. I probably won't be as linear in my response here as I would like to be. We want people who work at law firms, especially newer emerging talent who have a different sense of what it means to be a worker in a place for a particular time, to have opportunities to bring the whole self to work, to do the stuff they care about, to be engaged in different ways. And sometimes that translates to more diverse attorneys taking on more pro bono work, and sometimes it doesn't. And we really have to be mindful of, how are we offering opportunities? How are we, trying to get things staffed? We also have to be responsive to legal services input that we're hearing in a louder way right now about it matters who shows up to do the work and what you look like and what your identities are. It doesn't feel as good to a Black or brown community when it's all white, the white guys that show up to do the work. Like, at the same time, we want the white male lawyers and white female lawyers to understand that this is everybody's problem and to do the work. So there's a lot there to think through. If I lift up out of it and try to think globally and strategically, what I want is for, the lawyers at my firm to understand that no one actually benefits from systemic racism. That certainly there is disproportionate impact, harm, and hurt on communities of color. And that has to be top of mind all the time. But everybody has to be part of this solution, and so how do we do that in a way that offers opportunities to the people who care about the things and to the clients who are receiving the legal work? It's a complicated puzzle, and I'm not going to pretend that I have it all figured out, because I don't. What I know is that there's a lot of work to be done, and I want everyone who sincerely cares about doing this work to have the opportunity to do it. And then it's on me and my colleagues to make sure that work is done in a compassionate, professional, informed way. And coming back to LFAA, I love that I think you may have experienced this, Lauren, at your law firm, that sometimes pro bono and DEI work are very siloed. And some of that makes sense, right? Because we don't want to say all the racial justice pro bono work should be done by attorneys of color. Like, that's not what we're trying to do. At the same time, it would be better if our pro bono work was informed by professionals like you, Lauren, who could help us to understand race equity and racial justice work through a different lens. I'm certain I didn't answer all of your questions, but if you want to,
Yeah, no.
like push me again on any of the things I didn't answer, I'm happy to try again.
No, like that's great. And I think you touching upon like this being more or less like a community effort, like the key players who care about these initiatives are involved, and the ones who aren't is kind of like, okay, well, you can stand out of the way until you really want to understand and process this information and make the decision for yourself whether you want to join the movement or not. And it's fine either way, but just creating that space I think is important. And like having diverse teams, like you were saying, like you can't just have a team of all Black lawyers. Like that kind of starts to fall into the place where you're not getting a diverse perspective and you're not getting diverse ideas. And it's great to have Black and Hispanic and LGBT, the full gamut represented, but you also have to have the other individuals too to collectively come up and be able to tackle these systems that exist. And you mentioned a little earlier too, which I wanted to point out, like these systems have existed for years. Like this isn't going to be fixed within 5 or 10 years. Like this is a lifelong commitment. And to just see the thought out, meticulous plans that have been laid out to make sure that this alliance and the industry is able to turn for the better is just like a great thing to watch and to be a part of. And like you, I'm very passionate about these areas and these things. So it's like I said, it's great to be a part of this. And so turning directions into the law firms and the practice of law, how can firms implement, or how do you feel that firms can implement programs or initiatives to support combating systemic racism in the lawyers' practices and practice groups? Because it's hard to dive all the way into the nuances and the levels of what practice groups entail, but you basically have a practice group head who's leading the practice and who's giving all the information from the top down. And so how do you give them programs and initiatives to help with their practice in combating the systemic racism that exists? And how do you see the social and racial justice movement impacting the future generations of lawyers who aren't even in the firms yet?
Mm-hmm. So honestly, Lauren, you're probably better equipped to answer that question than I am. I mean, that is a, sounds to me like a DEI professional question. And I care about those questions and I have thoughts about them for sure. But I would love to hear your answers to that. What I will say from the pro bono legal advocacy perspective, and this is something I'm learning along the way. So my co-president of LFAA is a woman named Keisha Morrow, who's the head of diversity at Cravath. And I've been working quite a lot with other DEI professionals from other firms who have been really inspiring to me in talking about how, sure, law firms have all sorts of internal work to do. So does pretty much every corporation, company. I mean, all of us do. People, individual, everybody has that work to do, right? Law firms for sure in particular. But that doesn't mean that lawyers who want to do anti-racist work shouldn't start now. And so from, wearing my pro bono professional LFA or Skadden hat, what that says to me is march forward with trying to create opportunities to dismantle systemic racism. doing the best I can to make sure that when the lawyers at my firm or the lawyers affiliated with LFAA have as much training as possible in how to work with people who've experienced racism, who have lived experience, that they understand systems, that they understand what their mission is, and then continue doing the parallel work to make our institutions better. But I might throw that back to you, Lauren, and say what should we do? I'll just say it's a criticism that LFAA has received over the past 6 months is how can you launch an alliance to dismantle racism when law firms have so much work to do? And I think our position is we are not defensive about that at all. Yep, the answer is yes. We have that work to do, and we're going to do it. And at the same time, we're going to continue doing this pro bono advocacy. But what do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, so in my interactions with the group heads, it's been, I would say, more not hesitancy, but just probably skepticism in a way, because when you're seeing a lot of these practice group heads, a lot of them are, from the older generation, so they are set kind of in the way that they grew up, the things that they experienced, how they came up in the firm environment, and so it takes a lot of just the educational piece. So providing those educational resources, providing training programs, like you mentioned. A big one that Sidley is doing is unconscious bias training, and not only focusing on, the training portion of it, but also the follow-up aspect of, okay, so here's a scenario, how can you handle this? And providing the practice group heads and the practices with the tools and the resources necessary to be able to make sure that they're creating a quality environment for all of their lawyers under them. So I think from that aspect of like training programs from the training programs aspect, like that's definitely something that firms can do. And I know Sidley, we did them like biannually, like once every 2 years, within the last 3 years probably we did that, but now we're shifting our focus to doing them twice a year now, because these are very important questions or very important topics that need to continue to be discussed, but also just from being able to support the practices, giving all of the lawyers a wide breadth of work and allowing them to be able to develop within their careers. So giving them client development, giving them speaking opportunities, a lot of the opportunities that more times than less, which we don't like to really admit, but a lot of the times we end up giving work to people who look like us and who we identify with and connect with more than people who we don't. So that's a case where what we see right now is a lot of lawyers coming up, they just get work assigned to them based off of if a partner likes them, and not necessarily thinking strategically of, okay, if I don't give this diverse lawyer this opportunity, what's going to happen and how does that funnel, and how does that domino affect their career? Because a lot of the times when the lawyers aren't getting these opportunities, they get pushed down to the forefront because then junior lawyers start getting these opportunities and then you get lost in the shuffle. So there's a lot of moving parts, but I think providing the training programs like unconscious bias training and just understanding to give a wide breadth of work to everyone is just a fine starting point, even because there's so much work to be done just within that, which I think if we can start tackling the hours issue and the work allocation issues and the equity issues and even inclusion issues, that then we'll be able to start moving forward and putting our money where our mouth is, essentially. So that's kind of my perspective.
I knew you could answer that better than me.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time, dealing with these issues and speaking with a lot of the partners around like what we can do to incentivize and just get the partner heads on board of these matters. So going into the next question, just about some of the obstacles that you're seeing Skadden facing as we're entering into this new chapter, and how can people who do work in a law firm who are attending this session today, how can they get involved in, this initiative of dismantling the systemic racism that exists? And if they're already not, involved in task force or working groups, how can they, get into these spaces and try and make a change if that's what's important to them?
Mm-hmm. So obstacles and how do you get involved? So obstacles, I mean, for law firms generally, I think we have to build up trust. We have to build trust with the communities that we're trying to serve, with the legal services organizations, nonprofits, public interest organizations that we're trying to partner with. We have to do a better job, and this is particular to lawyers, I think, in thinking we already know, we already or always know what the right answer is or the solution is. That we have to do a better job in listening to the people and communities we want to lift up. And those are obstacles that I think we're trying to take head on at this point, and I'm hopeful about that. And I think with the professionalization of the pro bono role at law firms, the demand from talent coming out of law school to do this work, the demand from corporations and clients of law firms that we pay attention to this work, we're going to get this to a better place. I think that's right. How do you get involved? I mean, if you're at a law firm, I'm hopeful that you have some sort of pro bono regime, infrastructure person who you can reach out to and say, I want to do this work. And that would take the shape of, maybe representation of individuals who've experienced some sort of racism or hardship, and you could be involved in that. Or you could say, if we're not already involved in LFAA, I'd like to get involved in some sort of systemic work, and that would happen. If you're not at a law firm that has that aspect to its practice or firm, then I would say start it. Like if you're if you're somebody who cares about this, then create the role, create the job, create the path or the program. I mean, as Meredith pointed out at the beginning, I started out as a criminal defense attorney at a large law firm, and I wrote my job description. I wrote a business plan to create my job, and that was in 2008, and here we are. So if you care about that, these things or other things, make it happen. I think people can make things happen. And then if you're not a lawyer, but you're at a law firm, I would say that I think law firms are becoming more savvy to and sophisticated about the talent that is at law firms beyond the lawyers, and are starting to integrate that into the work that they do. And if they're not at your firm, ask them to, because that adds real value to all sorts of people and places and efforts. And then if you're not a lawyer or not at a law firm, this is what I have conversations with people all the time, family members, community members, neighbors. For me, I'm probably oversimplifying it, but the question is, what do you care about? What are your skills, and where is the need? And then you match your skills and your interest and the need together, and you come up with a plan. And the plan can be very small. I mean, the first thing I had my kids do was a get out the vote effort, where they researched voting and they wrote up a one-page flyer about how to vote in the town where we live. And it was nonpartisan so that we wouldn't, create problems that way. And they got all their buddies together on a Saturday afternoon, and they walked around the neighborhood interacting with our neighbors, telling them how to vote. And so if my they were 5 through 11 at the time can do that, certainly the people on this Zoom can do that. So I would like people to feel empowered to make change.
Yeah, and I think that's a really excellent point to bring up. We had many excellent points in that, but just from on your point about if you're in a law firm and if the position doesn't exist, to just create it. If anything that I've experienced and that I've been shocked by is how willing firms are to create positions that need to be. It's just explaining to them, like, why is there a need? Like, what will this role be fulfilling? Like, what's who am I going to be helping, and how is this going to benefit the firm? Because at the end of the day, the firm wants to know, like, how are you going to be bringing in money for them? But just like, they're very open as long as you have that passion. And there's so many times where, you might just be talking to someone and just find out that you guys have such similar interests, and that's a buddy that, you can work with on this. And it's not as difficult to create these positions as one may think when you're talking about, a big law firm. So I think that was really important to point out, that it is actually something that is doable. And then your point about the clients in the law schools and how they've made a push. I think it's really interesting to watch law students, essentially interviewing firms, asking them what their pro bono programs are. What have they been doing to tackle the social and the racial justice movements that are going on today? Even just asking, the lawyers, like, what's their experience been? How do they feel the firm has reacted? And so there are all of these things coming up from the law school end, but then also from the client end. Like, the clients are demanding to have diverse teams. So when you're having it from both ends, like we were talking about yesterday, like, you're kind of forced into, making a decision whether or not you're going to get with the times or,
That's right.
fall, basically.
That's right.
So I absolutely love that. And just from the perspective of kids, like, kids are so impressionable. And although I don't have kids, I remember as a kid, if my mom wanted me to go do something and explain to me that, hey, if you're volunteering, you have more than other people. Like, you have to give back, and explaining the reasons behind it of why. And that's the same thing with, tackling issues around race and dismantling the systems that are in place. When you're explaining to kids these things, like, most likely they're going to be like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean that goes on? And then their impressions start to get formed. And it's just so crucial and important that, if you're seeing your kids becoming interested, or even just starting to have those conversations about what matters to them, like, that just makes it better for just the years ahead. Like, not to say that they're not going to, experience other issues, or they're not going to, hear the other side and have people who discredit whatever they care about, but they're at least, on some sort of path, on the right path.
Yeah.
And you hope that they're able to, influence their kids and other kids and their friends, and that it's just a ripple effect. And I think it's so important to get kids involved, and just at least talking about these issues and having an open dialogue and answering questions that they have. I think the reason why so many of us are where we are today is because we didn't ask enough of those questions, or we didn't have an opportunity to have conversations with our parents about the issues going on in the world. So I just wanted to point out those three things that you mentioned.
I think that's right. I mean, I want to be the first voice in my kid's head. It's almost like, we're talking about vaccinations right now. For me, I sort of think of it in that way. I want to vaccinate my kids against hate. I want to have them have my voice ringing in their head about, justice and equity. And so that when they encounter hate, they hear my voice and they at least question that. That is really important to me. For me, I'm raising 3 boys and a girl, white kids, really privileged kids, and I need them to know that this is their problem. I need them to know that while they may perceive some superficial benefit bonus from their whiteness or their privilege, that is not deep, and that is not where we want to be as people. I need them to understand that at like a core soul level. And I think that those are conversations we have to have. One of the things that made such an impression on me, and it was from someone in your profession, Lauren, is when my eldest were maybe 5 years old. It was around Martin Luther King Day, and I was having dinner with our director of diversity. and my kids were asking questions about it. And I said something to her that I'm sort of embarrassed about now, where I said, should I explain to them, who Martin Luther King Jr. was? Should I explain to them this struggle and this history of racism? Because right now they don't see that, they don't understand it, they don't, and her response to me was much more eloquent than this, but it was something like, well, aren't you privileged that your kids don't have to know that? Aren't you lucky that your kids don't have to understand that history or that fear that others have to encounter when they're raising their children? And it clicked for me that I have to be fierce with my kids about helping them to understand history and their role in it, and what they are responsible for in terms of making positive change.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so we already kind of touched upon our last question about what can people who aren't lawyers or in the legal industry do when they care about these matters. So since we already touched upon it, I'll go ahead and open it up, or I'll give it back to Meredith to open it up for the Q&A section, just since we have about 10 minutes left. But thank you all for listening. This was a great conversation.
Thank you both. Yeah, very, very interesting. And I think a lot of what you shared will probably resonate both with everybody on this call and just in our lives in general. And I am happy now to open it up. If anybody has any questions for Brenna or Lauren, feel free to go off of mute and just ask your question, or if you want to type anything in to Allison or I in the chat, that'd be great.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi. So I'm old enough to remember, or to have felt in a law firm, and I'm not in a firm anymore. I'm in-house, but to remember feeling that I was in an environment that was unmalleable, like that there is a top-down leadership, and you did not question the leadership, but I'm also young enough that I've seen that change over time. Brenna, I'm assuming that they pull you out for recruiting stuff too, because pro bono is so important for younger attorneys now. Are you both seeing in recruiting environments that a stronger push, or more demands being made by incoming attorneys, like something that you wouldn't, at least when I was in my mid-20s, I would not have been able to imagine being in a position, seeking a job and stating, this is what I want from this job to the people I was applying to a job for. I've seen that in-house. I work at Amex. We've seen that in our recruiting, like people coming in saying, this is the kind of workplace I want. Are you seeing that more with incoming classes of attorneys?
Yes, but I think it's tempered by the historical moment. So on the one hand, we have this empowerment of lawyers, talent, law students, and so on to say, my career must be more than the billable hour. I must be able to do things that I care about. At the same time, you have COVID and uncertainty about the economy and, the interaction of law school career services offices telling law students, get the job first, then ask those questions. So it's varied. It's vast and varied. I think it depends on the law school where people are coming from, and how much power they think they have or leverage they think they have in the interviewing process. So I see difference among law firms. But one of the other things I think that is empowering more junior lawyers to say, I want to do this, and if not, I'll go somewhere else, is that the model has really changed around law firms, right? So people don't come to law firms and expect, I'm going to stay here forever and make partner. Not that ever was really the case, but now, so it's not even really a goal. I mean, for a lot of attorneys. They come in and they say, I want to be trained here. I want to pay off some student loans, but I've got different plans, you know, and so I'd like to be able to do what I care about here, as well as the other stuff that I'm required to do here. And then I'm going to move on. So I do think there's a shift. I also think there's a shift in the involvement of private bar for-profit attorneys in social movements. So, and I think the best example of that is probably the travel ban and immigration issues in 2017, where lawyers just showed up at the airports, and most of them did not know what they were doing. Most of them were not immigration attorneys. They just wanted to be there, and they wanted to do anything they could. And I think that's a little different too. And that's carrying through to natural disasters, racial justice movement, and so on, that lawyers are, I think in a really positive way, reclaiming their role as keepers of the rule of law and protection of vulnerable populations across the board.
Yeah, and I'll give my 2 cents too, just since I have a little bit of a different perspective, having been in recruiting for 2.5 years. So seeing it from that side, and then moving into the D&I space and still doing recruiting. And I definitely have seen, especially over the years, more vocalization from the law students, in that they're going to be vocal about what they care about, which I think usually in the past, like it would be in an interview setting, it would be just expected that the interviewers would be interviewing the student, and not that the student would be interviewing the lawyers. And that's just what I'm seeing across the board now, our students being more open to doing that, and using that leverage of, hey, like if I start at your firm and I'm not seeing the things that you told me were there, like I'll leave and I'll go somewhere else without hesitation. Like it's crazy the amount of firms that are hiring lateral candidates, and just clients who are willing to take 2nd and 3rd year law students now, whereas before I think it would be clients would be taking more senior lawyers, like where you'd be a 5th or 6th or 7th year, then you'd be seeing that turnover of the lawyers going over to clients. But now that it's more of a position for, you know, a 2nd year associate to be able to do that, I think students are starting to realize that, and they're being vocal and honest about it. And there's not really, you know, a wall up there. And secondly, I definitely see some students who won't necessarily address these issues to the lawyers, but then they'll come to me and they'll say, hey, like, I really care about this. And like, do you think I can ask like this question, or how can I phrase this, or who should I talk to even? So I think after that formal interview process, there are ongoing discussions that are had at a deeper level, where students are able to kind of get more in the weeds about what's really going on at firms.
Lauren, can if does anybody else have a question? Because I actually kind of have a follow-up question to that. I'm curious about in the recruiting process and with recruiting with law students, that if there are, do you think that there's a culture right now where they're maybe not comfortable asking those questions to other lawyers in the interview process, and instead want to come to somebody specializing in the area, or somebody doing your specialized work? Or why do you think that? Do you think that's a culture, and do you think that culture is changing?
I think that it's a little bit of, yes, it being the culture, but I think too that when law students see me, they think of me as their peer in a way because of my age. And like my boss will be open about this. She's like, you're closer to them and you can relate more to them than I can as like a 45-year-old woman. Like you just have a little bit more of an insight. So I think that students are willing to go to people who they connect with and feel like they're their peer. But I also think that there is this movement. I've seen time and time again when there are certain things that come out on Above the Law or on American Lawyer issues, most recently pertaining to big law firms supporting certain energy and environmental clients. and law students, being vocal about them not being okay with big law firms supporting these companies. So I think that there is, a culture change for a subgroup of law students who feel comfortable enough to, they care about these issues and they want to talk about it and they're open about it and they don't care if it's going to off-put a law firm. And then you have others who, they just are waiting more so to identify or find that person that they really truly connect with and feel that they can ask those questions and be candid and get candid responses too.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Following up on that, as someone who is often in the position of interviewing law students and lateral candidates, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions about how to make myself sort of more receptive to those questions, whether it's a question I can answer or referring the candidate or law student to other resources at my firm. And for context, I work in a big law firm here in DC.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there are a couple of things that you could do, but the one thing that I always turn back to, and this I apply it in every facet of what I do, is it's not a personal attack on you. It's just they're trying to get more information about like the firm and making the right decision for them. And it's less about you as the individual and just more of the company that you're representing. At least that's what I feel from my perspective it is. And I don't think students go in, trying not to connect with the interviewers or, ask a bad question or an inappropriate question. But I think just taking you yourself out of it and just thinking of it as like the law student just wants a full picture and wants to be able to get all of the information that they're able to make the right decision for themselves. And ultimately, you don't want a potential associate coming in who doesn't really want to be there or is half-assing it just because, they think something rather than them having been able to ask that question and then get the true answer and then making a decision off of that. So I hope that answers part of your question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Well, I know that we are at the 1 o'clock hour. If Lauren and Brenna, you're available, or if there are any other questions, we can probably take one more. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us today.
What a nice way to spend an hour. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you.
so much. This was
Thank you for
great.
including me.
Thank you
very
both.
much. This was great.
Thanks everyone. And thank you for joining us for our third conversation of this series. Check the alumni website and your emails for more opportunities in the new year. And I hope everybody has a great day, and anybody in the Virginia area, stay warm and